Welcome back to Variologies. My name is Dan Calcagno, and today we're going to look at the real names of Jesus and his disciples. Have you ever seen this meme on the internet? This is an attempt by probably a secular person trying to discredit the Christian faith. It says, "How did Jesus find guys named Peter, John, James, Matthew, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, and Simon in the Middle East?" Now, on the surface, it seems like a clever jab, but it reveals a significant misunderstanding about the names and context in the New Testament. The person posting this meme is obviously unaware that these names are anglicized versions of originally Hebrew or Greek names. In fact, many of the figures in the New Testament were Jewish, and they had Hebrew names, although some had Greek names as well. And this reflects the cultural diversity of the time, much like how many Jewish people today will likely have a Hebrew name, but also a more common Western name. So let's look at these names, and let's begin with perhaps the most famous name of the New Testament, Jesus. His name in Hebrew is Yeshua, which means salvation. And then that was transliterated into Greek, and then eventually makes its way into English, and we say Jesus. However, his name, if transliterated directly from the Hebrew, would be Jeshua, or in its longer form, Joshua. Check out a previous video on this channel called Joshua the King. But what about Jesus' mother Mary? Well, in Hebrew, her name would be Miriam, just like Moses' sister Miriam. What about one of Jesus' most important disciples, Simon Peter? Well, his name, Simon, is Hebrew. It's Shimon. And the name Peter actually comes from a Greek word, Petros, which means rock, which Jesus used as a nickname for him. But he was also called Kepha, which is the Aramaic equivalent of Peter. What about Jesus' disciple John? Well, his Hebrew name is Yochanan. John is simply the way that name became anglicized over time, and there are many variations to this name. Perhaps the most interesting case is the name James. In Hebrew, James would be called Yaakov, which is transliterated into English as Jacob. It's only when James is transliterated into Greek and then eventually makes its way into English that we get the name James, but his name is Jacob. And what about the Apostle Paul? Of course, Paul is well known as the apostle to the Gentiles, but Paul was Jewish. His name was Shaul, or Saul. That was his Hebrew name. And like many Jewish people of the day, he also had a Greek name which he would use in civil matters, let's say, or when speaking to non-Jewish people. His name was Paulos, which of course comes into English as Paul. So these are just a few examples of the names we find in the New Testament, which actually originated in Hebrew or Aramaic, reflecting their Jewish heritage. And the fact that they had Greek names reflects the fact that they lived in a Hellenistic world. That is the Greek culture and language that remained popular in the first century. And it's not just names of people that causes confusion. We have other words in the New Testament that, when translated properly or without bias, let's say, sound a lot more Jewish or make a lot more sense within a Jewish context. But we'll save those words for another time. So the next time you see that meme about how ridiculous it is that Jesus had disciples with these names, remember, it's easy to make assumptions based upon surface level information, but when we dig a little deeper and look a bit closer, it is then that we can find the truth. But let me know what you think. Let's continue the discussion in the comments, or follow me on X at Dan Calcagno. We can talk about it there, and support me on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/variologies.